Hi, everybody. My name is Daniel Pollack-Pelzner. I teach Shakespeare at Linfield University in Oregon, and I am excited to talk with you about The Merchant of Venice. It's one of my favorite Shakespeare plays, and it was the first one that I ever saw performed when I was 11 years old. I remember my grandma said that a Jewish family like ours should not see this play, but my grandpa got tickets for me and him to see it on Broadway, and I was smitten by it. And I think it's because, as an 11-year-old, I was so excited that when Shylock is praising Portia in disguise as the law clerk, he calls her a Daniel, an upright judge, a Daniel. And then when she sort of pivots to the other side, Bassanio's right-hand man, Graziano, calls her a second Daniel. And since my name was Daniel, I felt like I was the hero of this play, that I could identify with Portia, the quick-witted, clever heroine who is outwitting the literalism of the law and the restrictions of paternal authority and bringing about a happy comic ending. And I'm like, all this was going through my 11-year-old mind, and I didn't have to worry about identifying with the Jewish figure on stage. And as I've taught this play and written about it over the years, I have become really interested in the kinds of questions it poses about who gets to be part of the kind of community that comedy forms. This is classified as a comedy in the first folio, though we might ask about whether or not that's a designation that it earns or that we are comfortable with. And a couple questions I'd like to suggest for you as you return to this play or encounter it for the first time. Question about Jews, question about gender, question about genre. So, question about Jews first. What is Shakespeare representing in this figure of Shylock the Jew? Part of the allure for his Elizabethan audience seems to have been the prospect of encountering unadulterated Jewish villainy on stage. And we get some evidence of this when we look at the first published edition of Merchant of Venice, a 1600 quarto, and I'm going to read the title here. The excellent history of the Merchant of Venice, with the extreme cruelty of Shylock the Jew toward the said merchant in cutting a just pound of his flesh. So that's the advertisement. That's why you would want to buy this play, was to encounter this extreme cruelty. And the representation of Shylock the Jew probably would have summoned for Shakespeare's audiences a history more of stage Jews than of real-life Jews, who officially had been banned in England for several hundred years, wouldn't be welcome back until the next century, but were visible on stage. So Christopher Marlowe had just had a big hit, The Jew of Malta, the central character Barabbas, a Jew who's a scheming Machiavel, a kind of Richard III villain who boasts about poisoning wells and killing off nuns. And there was a history that Shylock probably would have been portrayed with a red wig, maybe even a prosthetic nose, that would have evoked characters of the devil from those old community Bible pageants, the mystery plays that were performed before the rise of the professional London theater. So Shylock would have looked like Satan or Judas, would have evoked Barabbas and Jew of Malta, and would indeed be acting out the kind of blood libel, this pernicious myth of Jews preying on the flesh of innocent Christians, actually on stage. So there's definitely that kind of archetype that Shakespeare is summoning, and that seems to have dominated the performance tradition of this play for a couple of centuries, as it was seen as a sort of a comedy with this horrible villain being overcome. But then around the 19th century, with a shift to more psychological approaches to Shakespearean character, Shylock started to be portrayed more sympathetically, maybe even as a victim of Christian bigotry rather than a villain himself. And we might look at lines in the play, of course, when Shylock talks about being spat upon, treated like a cur, a dog, suffering through the loss of his daughter, who elopes with a Christian and takes their money with him, and his daughter pawning off Shylock's wife's ring for a monkey, a ring that Shylock says he would not have parted with for a wilderness of monkeys. That evokes for us perhaps a recognizable individual psychology more than this stage type, and that, of course, offers this plea for humanistic connection in that famous speech, "Hath not a Jew eyes? If you prick us, do we not bleed? And if you wrong us, do we not revenge?" Suggesting then that the vengeance we see Shylock pursue is less this stereotypical Jewish bloodlust than the kind of response to traumas that he's suffered. So it's a question that you might think about as you read this, how would you want to stage the character of Shylock, and how do the limits of Jewish Christian understanding emerge in the language of the play? And you might put some pressure on words that you see like gentle or kind that have a lot of different associations in the play. It might sound for us like sort of synonyms for being nice or being friendly. But gentle was a homonym for Gentile, that is non-Jewish for Shakespeare's audiences, and also summoned a class association, that is being a gentleman or a gentlewoman. And so when the Duke says to Shylock, we expect a gentle answer, Jew, the play seems to be asking us to think about whether a Jew could ever be seen as gentle in its class or religious term. Or when Antonio says of Shylock, the Hebrew will turn Christian, he grows kind. We might think of kind both in the sense of friendly and also kind in the sense of being of the same category. When Hamlet is upset that his uncles become his father, a little more than kin and less than kind. That is, there's something unnatural that goes along with unfriendliness. Can you be kind in this play to people who you do not see as part of your kind, say? And these kind of category confusions that are embodied in the language get summoned in that famous question when Portia shows up in the trial scene and asks, which is the merchant here and which the Jew? Is that a funny line, because of course anybody should be able to tell them apart? Or is that suggesting that the kind of rigid categories on which this play seems to depend might be a little blurrier than we think? And I'm quite intrigued by scholar Stephen Orgel's suggestion that the name Shylock would not have been a Jewish name for Shakespeare's audiences, but a recognizably English name, one that in fact appeared in a lot of census rolls in the 16th century. Shy meaning light-colored or white, lock meaning hair, so it was a name like Whitehead or Whitlock, recognizable English name, that perhaps this ultimate outsider figure was in fact an insider of a sort, or a kind of mirror for English audiences to see qualities of themselves that they might want to project onto others. So, questions about how we understand the Jewish figure in this play. Just briefly, gender questions. This seems to be a play in which we are rooting for a cross-dressed heroine to bring about a comic resolution. And we might see Portia like Rosalind, say, or like Viola. And she talks about her problem at the beginning of the play, the will of a living daughter curbed by the will of a dead father, because she's stuck waiting for somebody to solve this kind of fairy tale casket riddle to get a marriage partner. Is that indeed her struggle in the play and the reason why she pursues cross-dressing? Or might we see that, in a way, the obstacle to her romantic union is less her father or less Shylock's bloodlust than Antonio, who also seems to have a deep affective connection with Bassanio early in the play when Bassanio wants money to woo Portia. And Antonio says, my purse, my person, my extremist means lie all unlocked to your occasion. What is it exactly that he's offering Bassanio? Or another way of putting it would be, is Antonio the means through which Bassanio can get Portia? Or is Portia the means through which Antonio can get Bassanio? And a lot of Shakespeare's comedies ask us to think about the relationship between male bonds and male-female bonds. And this seems like a play that's really interested in how those get navigated and how we might see Portia and Nerissa's ring trick, offering rings to their husbands and then winning them back as disguised as men and then calling them out at the end of the play, as a way that the play kind of asks, who is it who's going to bed with whom at the end of this play? And then when we think about the kind of closure that this play offers, particularly in a movement from the intensity of the trial scene in Act 4 to the sort of romantic space of Portia's home in Belmont in Act 5, a transition that a lot of productions have found difficult to pull off, we might ask who is included and who's excluded from that final union. If you were directing the play, where would Antonio be at the end? Is he a kind of third wheel, or is he incorporated somehow, perhaps through finance or through bonds to romantic unions? What about Jessica? She doesn't say anything at the end of the play. A lot of productions like to end with her perhaps wistfulness or regret about her conversion experience. And what about figures we don't see at the end at all? The Prince of Morocco, who begs Portia not to dislike him for his complexion, that is the color of his skin, but she sends off with the wish that all of his complexion be treated so. Or another black character who's hinted at but not shown, a Moor whom we learn the comic figure Lancelot has got with child, and seems to be sort of uncontained or unrepresentable. A great essay by Kim F. Hall, the scholar, called Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, about the thread of miscegenation in this play. So you might think of the limits of who gets to be representable and who can't be or isn't represented as this play moves towards some kind of closure or some kind of resonant ambiguity, which is the merchant here and which the Jew. I'm excited to see what you find, what kind of answers that you come up with to these questions, and I hope you enjoy.